Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, I had an interesting thing happen the other day. I say interesting far too much. I got to come up with some better synonyms or different, some synonyms for that. But today probably won't be the day. Anyhow, so I'm sitting there talking with a couple guys locally, and we're talking about maybe, if we're compatible, if we could maybe form a game group, get one or two other people involved. But we're talking about like, what games are we interested in playing, blah blah blah. And so one of the games that comes up is Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I floated a few other games like Broken Rooms and Hollow Earth Expedition. I was talking about Aberrant just because I'm starting to read that, and one of the guys is actually a World of Darkness guy, and really it was. And once I explained the whole premise, he was like, "Oh, that's really cool." So anyhow, this video has nothing to do with that. But we're talking about a bunch of things. So as we're talking, it looked like we were kind of gravitating at least to starting with something like Lamentations of the Flame Princess. The guys are familiar with that game. But the topic of setting came around. Like, what kind of setting do you want to have it in? And so, we were already talking about the fact that I like something that's like humanocentric, low fantasy. And it came down to like, would we want to use the implied setting of 16th century or late 16th century, early 17th century, 30 Years' War Europe, or something else? And we're going back and forth, with our various experiences, and it's this constant, it was friendly dialogue. And one of the things I talked about, the things I've worked on and put together a bit of setting for, and I'm not sure how much I'd use it, but I've always just loved this ever since I saw it. There's something called Inversia, and if you just Google Inversia, you will find this as well as a bunch of other alternate Earths. This one is simply if you have the water and the land reversed. And I think there's some things in the middle of the seas where it's it's shallower to begin with. So this is it here. So everything's blue. Well, that's water. It's a bunch of like Great Lakes. Blue is water. So that's pretty cool. And we're talking about that. And one of the guys mentions that he really enjoys playing in settings where it's the real world. So the learning curve on figuring out like where everything is and what are the names of the nations and what have you is much smaller, and we can get on with playing. And so we're talking about maybe playing in the implied setting of Lamentations of the Flame Princess. So, Europe, nominally around 30 Years' War. And as we're talking about that, he mentions that, it doesn't necessarily have to be completely accurate as long as we have some kind of base. So we have the places like Paris, or France. Everybody knows that the capital of France is Paris, and everybody knows that France is this country right here. But it doesn't have to be 100% of it exact. And it made me think of what Runesinger talks about a lot. He likes this world with a twist, and I'm sure he probably stole that from somebody else. I certainly stole it from him during that conversation, saying that that's kind of cool to do this world with a twist, and maybe a bigger twist than something like All for One Regime Diabolique does, because that is 30 Years' War Europe. I mean, I'm really looking for. I've funded the Kickstarter, which actually went through. They got complete funding, so I think a couple more days before it's over. For Satan's Playground, so expanding the All for One Regime Diabolique setting into the other countries, and should be really, really cool. Anyhow, that particular game doesn't really change too much. There's vampires and werewolves and demons and all that good junk, but most of the historical facts are the same. You can kind of mess around a little bit here and there, and we certainly have with some of the figures of history, as well as as Paul Wiggy Wade Williams has messed around with some of that. But that's this world with a twist, but not a heck of a lot of a twist. And we were talking about 7th Sea First Edition, because that's the one I'm familiar with. I remember reading that, and one of the things that really knocked me out about that game was that setting, where it's Europe. It's Europe. Everything's got a different name, but you can kind of figure out, the country that's France, people are kind of French. Country that's Italy, it's that's this world with a lot of a twist. And so we were gravitating towards something a little bit in between. So in other words, like, we don't have to remember all of history, but we just have this basic geographical kind of, ballpark of where things are. And it's funny, I talked to some guys online, Dark Age roleplay games and Josh James and what have you. We're thinking about maybe we should, do something where we play on a regular basis. Maybe get a few other people, maybe probably one or two, because Hangouts is tough to do more than 3 or 4 players. And we're talking about that, and I kind of float that idea back to them as a setting, and they're like, yeah, that would be really cool. So it got me thinking about using something like that. I've certainly used the geographical world, but changed things. I remember I did a short campaign where it was pretty much New England. It was not New England. I had funny little names for everything, but we started out literally in the town I'm from. And so the geography was all the same, but of course it was a fantasy. It was a high fantasy world. But at least that gave the players some kind of familiarity. Well, where is this? How far is Hartford from Middletown? And how far is Providence from Hartford? They have that idea. But kind of intrigued in doing something like this, using that like 30 Years' War period of Europe as a jumping off point. But having some artistic license. So the names of the countries tend to be the same. Perhaps some of the basic historical things that are going on, historical figures are the same, but then maybe taking a little bit more liberties with what's really going on in the world, especially outside of the epicenter of, say, Europe. Let's probably start there. But maybe you get to other continents, and I hate to pick on anything because I'm sure I've got a viewer in another country, but I'm thinking like, maybe Australia is really bizarre. Maybe something like the Americas, which have just recently been colonized. Maybe if you go over there, maybe it's the pretty much the uncharted territory, and here there be dragons or something. So I'm really kind of digging that kind of vibe. So what have you done in terms of this world with a twist? Not just in modern games, because that's what I usually think of. When I think of like how would I run like something like Hollow Earth Expedition. Well, that's this world, modern world with a twist. Broken Rooms is much closer to the modern world with a twist. Something like Aberrant, same thing. But what about a historical period where then you have a lot more license to twist it, because we just hadn't explored the entire world yet. Sure, there were people living there, but as far as like written history, you have a lot more artistic license. What is in the heart of the Amazon? What is in deepest Africa? What is in Antarctica? It's up to you at that point. Everything else can kind of function somewhat normally, but once you get into the really stranger areas, that's kind of cool. And besides, you can have all the kind of if it's Lamentations of the Flame Princess, for crying out loud, you can have all the Cthulhu-esque junk going on right in your own backyard. So what has your experience been with that? How much fun have you had playing this world with a twist, or 2 or 3 or 7?